Hello, this is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm going to walk you through how to solve a literal equation. In class, we learned that literal equations are basically formulas. So we've worked with them before. It's an equation that has more than one variable. And so in Algebra 1, you use literal equations all the time to create the equation represent a line on a graph. And so if you're given an equation and you're asked to put it in slope-intercept form, you've actually solved a literal equation because you're solving for one of the variables. So in this case, we have h equals vt minus gt squared for v. So they want you to solve this literal equation for v. And so what my goal is to move everything else besides v to the opposite side. And the thing I have to remember with these terms is if I'm not trying to separate the variables as far as gt squared. If I'm not trying to separate the g and the t from each other, then I don't need to move them one at a time. I can move them together as a unit by adding and subtracting. If I need to separate them, that's when I divide. And so to start with, I'm trying to isolate v. And so just like with solving an equation, I want to add and subtract first. And so this minus gt squared, I can move this entire term to the left side away from the v by just adding, because I'm not trying to separate the g and the t squared. And so my first step for solving this would be to add gt squared to both sides. And so when I simplify that, the gt squareds here on the right, they would cancel each other. But on the left, these are not like terms. So I would just write it out horizontally, h plus gt squared. And then the last thing that I have to do to solve for v is to get rid of this t. I need to move it to the left-hand side. And so this time I do want to separate the v and the t, the two variables that are beside each other. So instead of adding and subtracting, that's when I want to multiply or divide. And in this case, it's v times t, so I would divide. And I divide both sides by t, so the t's would eliminate on the right, and I would have one on the left. And so then once I simplify my term on the right here, the t's would cancel. I'd be left with v, so v would be isolated, and I will have achieved what they asked me to do. So if I write that out, it would look like this. And if I were completing a free response question, such as this, I could leave my answer in this form as a quotient here on the left. However, if it were a multiple choice test or quiz or just a multiple choice worksheet, more than likely this would be simplified further. And by that I mean they would have taken these two terms on top and separated it into two fractions. So if I continue to simplify, my final answer would be h over t plus gt squared over t, which could also be reduced because there's a t on top and bottom. And so the resulting equation would be h over t plus gt equals v. V is isolated, so I have solved the literal equation for the space.